You woke up this morning and made a decision. Maybe it was small. What to eat, whether to hit snooze, which route to take to work. But here's what you did not think about. No other animal on this planet can do what you just did. Not even close. A crow can solve a puzzle. A dolphin can recognize itself in a mirror. A chimpanzee can remember a sequence of numbers faster than you can. And yet, none of them are building cities. None of them are asking why they exist. None of them are watching a video about intelligence and wondering if they have enough of it. So what happened to you? What happened to your brain? And why, out of 4 billion years of life on this planet, did only one species end up here? The real answer is far stranger than you think. Start with the basics. Your brain weighs about 3 pounds. That sounds unremarkable until you realize it contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others, forming somewhere in the range of 100 trillion synaptic connections. That number is so large, it has almost no meaning when you say it out loud. It is more connections than there are stars in the Milky Way. More connections than grains of sand on several of Earth's beaches combined. But raw neuron count is not the whole story. Elephants have more neurons than you do in total. Sperm whales have brains 5 times larger than yours. And yet you are here, and they are not doing calculus. The difference is not size. The difference is architecture. Your prefrontal cortex, the region sitting just behind your forehead, is disproportionately large compared to every other animal that has ever lived. This is the part of your brain responsible for planning, for imagining futures that do not yet exist, for overriding impulse, for holding a thought in mind and turning it over like an object in your hands. Neuroscientist Susanna Herculano-Hausel spent years counting neurons across species and discovered that humans have a uniquely dense concentration of neurons in the cerebral cortex, the thin folded outer layer that handles abstract thought, language, and reasoning. It is not that you have a bigger brain. It is that your brain is packed differently, organized more tightly, wired for a kind of thinking that evolution, for some reason, only handed to you. But why you? Why did this happen to one primate in East Africa and nobody else? Part of the answer goes back 6 million years to a split. Your lineage and the lineage of chimpanzees diverged from a common ancestor. At that moment, 2 paths opened. One led to the forests, to strength, to social hierarchy built on physical dominance. The other led somewhere else entirely. The leading theory, championed by anthropologist Richard Wrangham, is that cooking did it, literally. When your ancestors discovered fire, somewhere around 1.8 million years ago, they began softening food before eating it. Cooked food is easier to chew, easier to digest, and releases far more calories per bite than raw food does. That caloric surplus went somewhere. It went to your brain. The human brain burns roughly 20% of your total daily energy, despite being only 2% of your body weight. That is an extraordinarily expensive organ to run. Before cooking, your ancestors could not have afforded it. After cooking, suddenly they could. At the same time, the gut shrank. Processing raw, tough food requires a massive digestive system. As diet improved, the gut got smaller, and energy that had been spent digesting could be redirected upward toward the skull. Wrangham called this the expensive tissue hypothesis, and the fossil record lines up with it cleanly. Every major increase in brain size in your evolutionary lineage corresponds with evidence of fire and cooked food nearby. But bigger brains alone do not explain what makes you different. What makes you different is language, not just communication. Wolves communicate. Bees communicate. What you have is recursive, symbolic, infinitely generative language. You can describe something that does not exist. You can talk about the past and the future simultaneously. You can tell a story, embed a story inside that story, and then step outside both and analyze them. No other animal has this. Linguist Noam Chomsky argued for decades that this capacity is not just a more advanced version of animal communication. It is a different kind of thing entirely. A leap, not a step. And that leap changed everything, because language allowed something that had never existed before, the accumulation of knowledge across generations. Think about what that means. Every other animal on this planet starts from zero. A wolf born today knows what its instincts tell it and what it can learn in its own single lifetime. But you were born into a world where 200,000 years of accumulated human knowledge was already waiting for you. You learned to read, and suddenly every human who had ever written anything down became your teacher. You learned mathematics that took civilizations centuries to develop, and you learned it in a classroom before you were a teenager. Psychologist Joseph Henrich calls this the collective brain. The idea is that human intelligence is not really located inside your skull. It is distributed across the group. No single human being could build a smartphone from scratch, understand all of its physics, mine all of its materials, and design all of its software. But humans collectively can, because knowledge is stored in culture, in books, in institutions, and in other people. You are not just one brain. You are a node in a vast cognitive network stretching back to the first human who ever scratched a symbol into stone. This is what your brain actually does, that no other animal's brain does. It connects to other brains and builds something larger than any individual. Now look at the other side of the question. Why did this not happen to anything else? The honest answer is that it almost did. Several times. Neanderthals had brains slightly larger than yours. They used tools. They buried their dead. There is evidence they used pigment, possibly for decoration or ritual. They were not primitive. They were close. And for tens of thousands of years, they coexisted with your ancestors in Europe and Asia. But they are gone, and you are not. The dominant theory today, supported by archaeologists João Zilho and others, is that Neanderthals did not lose to modern humans because they were less intelligent in the raw sense. They lost because they had smaller social networks. Your ancestors moved in larger, more connected groups. They traded over longer distances. They shared innovations across wider populations. A better spear tip invented in one camp spread across the continent. A Neanderthal invention might stay in one valley for 1,000 years and then vanish when that group died out. In other words, it was not raw brain power that finished the competition. It was the size of the collective brain. Dolphins are a fascinating case. They have large brains relative to body size. They show empathy, complex social bonds, problem solving, and something that looks remarkably like culture, with different populations of dolphins using different foraging techniques passed down through generations. But they live in water. Their front limbs became fins. They cannot manipulate objects, cannot build tools, cannot create external representations of their thoughts. Intelligence without hands turns out to have a ceiling. You can be brilliant in the ocean and still never write a word. Crows and ravens push the ceiling from another direction. Neuroscientist Andreas Nieder has shown that corvids possess a form of abstract thought, can plan for the future, and understand concepts like zero, something once thought uniquely human. But their brains are tiny. The cognitive architecture is there in compressed form, but there is simply not enough neural hardware to scale it up to something like human-level reasoning. They are working with a powerful engine in a very small car. Great apes are the most haunting case of all because they are so close. Chimpanzees share approximately 98.7% of their DNA with you. They can learn hundreds of sign language symbols. They can deceive each other deliberately. They understand cause and effect. And yet the gap between a chimpanzee and a human is, in cognitive terms, incomprehensibly vast. A chimpanzee cannot ask why it is not as smart as you. It cannot formulate the question. It is on the other side of a threshold that, so far, only your species has ever crossed. That threshold has a name in some circles. Evolutionary biologist Mark Pagel calls it the cultural ignition point. The moment when accumulated knowledge begins to compound faster than any single generation can lose it. Once you cross that point, intelligence stops being just a survival tool and starts being something that builds on itself indefinitely. Every generation inherits more than the last. Every generation starts a little further ahead. You are living in what happens several 100,000 years after that ignition. Now ask the harder question. Will it happen again? Will another species ever reach this threshold? The biological answer is possibly, but not soon, and not by accident. Evolution does not have a destination. There is no pressure pushing animals in the direction of human-like intelligence unless that intelligence solves a specific survival problem in a specific environment. For most animals, in most environments, being smarter is not actually the most efficient solution. Being faster is. Being stronger is. Having better senses is. Intelligence is expensive. It requires more food, longer development periods, greater vulnerability in childhood. An animal that is 30% smarter but takes twice as long to reach reproductive age and needs 3 times as many calories is not necessarily going to outcompete its less intelligent neighbors. The conditions that drove your intelligence, the specific combination of bipedalism, social living, fire, language, and a changing climate that repeatedly forced cognitive adaptation, were not inevitable. They were a collision of circumstances that happened once in 4 billion years of life on this planet. Paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould argued that if you rewound the tape of life and let it play again, humans would not appear. Some form of complex life might. But this exact form, with this exact kind of mind, is the product of so many branching improbabilities that calling it inevitable would be like calling a specific snowflake inevitable. But here is what is worth sitting with. If another species were to reach that threshold, you probably would not recognize it as intelligence at first. It would look like something strange. A species of birds that started sharing information across enormous distances. A species of octopus that began building and modifying its environment in ways that persisted beyond individual lifetimes. A species of social insect whose collective behavior crossed into something that started modeling the future. The signs would be subtle. Humans probably did not look intelligent to the forest either. Not at first. You are the only mind on this planet that can ask whether another mind will one day stand where you are standing. You are the only creature that can hold your own existence up to the light and wonder about it. Every animal alive is doing something. Only you are wondering why. That is not an accident. It is the end result of a chain of causes stretching back millions of years, a chain of fire and language and collective memory and sheer biological luck that produced, against every odd, a creature capable of understanding the odds. And this morning, that creature woke up and made a decision, the same way it always has. The same way nothing else on earth ever could.